Brothers and sisters in the beloved, Jai Baba. To live in love, to live in joy, to hold on to Baba's Daman, to love him more and more, and to be able to share that love, translate it in our daily lives, is the purpose of our visit for the Sahavas and the purpose of this celebration. Leatrice mentioned that I was born in a Baba family. I was born, I feel I was a Baba lover before I was born, because Baba had blessed my mother even before I was born, when she was carrying me. And that is a blessing that I carry over these years. When Lois called me up and told me that she would like me to share with people at the Sahavas, she mentioned that we have already heard your life with Baba a few times, and that it might be a good idea if you shared on some other subjects, and therefore I chose the subject as the 10 Demandments of True Discipleship. And she laughed, and I agreed with her. But there is no way that one could talk or share about any subject without going back to one's source, without a touchstone that I would have to go back to time and time again, as the way each one of you have to go back to your source and to your beginnings of how you came into the orbit of the Beloved One. And to begin with, I would like to take you back to a few of the meetings that I had with the Beloved One. But before that, I'd like to recreate the one that had a great deal of significance for me, and that was in 1962, the East-West Gathering, where Baba brought the East and West together. It was a gathering under a large awning with thousands of people, Westerners and Easterners gathered together. And I had come from Dehradun, from the north of India, to be at the East-West Gathering for just one day, because I had to appear for an examination. And I remember that moment when thousands of people were waiting outside the gates at Guru Prasad, and the doors opened, and as Anne was describing this morning, there was an avalanche of people coming into Guru Prasad. I was one of them, running at top speed, not knowing what to expect. Whether everyone thought that everybody would be in the front row. However, Baba was so meticulous in the arrangements that everybody had been designated certain areas, and state-wise, the Westerners were in front, would come from long distances, and then state-wise, people were gathered, and people sat at different areas which were designated areas. And then there was tremendous amount of excitement in the air. Baba had still not come out. And then, without any warning, the door opened, and thousands of people, I believe there were close to 200,000 or over were gathered there. And there was pin drop silence. And there was this small man in white sadra walking out, supported by his companion and friend Iraj Jasawala. And as if without a cue, in unison, the people gathered, shouted, "Avatar Meher Baba," and a small voice at the microphone said, "Ki Jai," and there was thunderous applause. And Baba went a few steps ahead, and again, "Avatar Meher Baba," and then a small voice said, "Ki Jai," and a few steps further. And the third time, "Avatar Meher Baba," and a small voice said, "Ki Jai." And before Baba sat down, he raised his hand, and everyone quietened down and sat down. I can feel that moment at this very moment, and I'd like to recreate that by all of you could stand up with me. Say, "Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai! Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai! Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai!" Jai Baba. This Sahavas was followed by another one in 1965, and I was not present for that particular Sahavas, but came in a little later at a special invitation that Baba had given me. And the first, after the preliminary meetings, Baba said, "Ask Iraj to take me out at Guru Prasad and explain to me in great detail of how the 1965 Sahavas was organized." That was very, very important. And Iraj, as if I was perhaps a newspaper reporter or somebody extremely important, he explained to me the nitty-gritty of how the Sahavas was organized. And I'd like to thank the Avatar Meher Baba Center for Southern California for organizing so beautifully a Sahavas where all his dear ones can gather in his love. Sahavas, as Baba has said, means intimate companionship at one point. He's given several definitions at several different places. The origin of the word is Saha, which means with, and Vas means to live. So basically it means to live with. And when we say Sahavas with the beloved, we mean a continuity of living with the Master. It is not that we come here, we share some beautiful moments, we live in love and joy and happiness without worry, and then we go back into our lives and forget the fact that we are living with Him continually. That is the mistake that we always make. We go back into our daily lives and forget the fact that there's so much that we have gained, there's so much that we have gathered, and that what the treasure that we have gathered and gained, we have to apply it into our daily lives. And that's the time that I began to think about these 10 demandments that Baba makes on us. I didn't say commandments, because Baba never encouraged any kind of apart from the fact that he gave orders or any such kind of regimentation in our lives. But these are the demandments that we make on ourselves so that we could be happy, we could be free of worry. While coming on the plane from Chicago to Ontario the day before yesterday, I was sitting on an aisle seat, and there were two young boys sitting in a center seat. And one of the boys came up to me and said, "Do you mind if I sit at the window?" And I said, "Sure." And he sat at the window. This was obviously his first trip on an airplane. He was very excited, and I was trying to get some sleep. And every time a cloud passed, he would wake me up to point out the cloud. Then there was the Grand Canyon, so he would shake me up and point that out to me. And then I was glad, and I was very understanding of his thrill, his joy. And then after some time, he was quiet, and he said, couldn't resist at looking at my ring. So he says, "Hey, that's you on the ring." And I said, "No, that's my master, MeherBaba." And he said, "What is a master?" And I said, "A master is a person like Jesus. Would you understand Jesus?" He said, "Yeah, I understand Jesus." He was 15 years old. He said, "I understand Jesus." And I said, "Yes, MeherBaba is the same as Jesus, and he's my master." And he said, "Well, I'm a Catholic, but my parents, my father, my mother, we don't go to church really. Can I show you some pictures?" And I said, "Sure." So he pulls out a packet of pictures. I was a total stranger. He pulled out a packet of pictures and he starts showing them to me. And there was his mother, and he was a small boy, and there was his brother. He comes to one photograph that he tries to skip. And I said, "Who is this?" He says, "That's my father." And I said, "What is his name?" And he said, "His name is Ray." And I said, "Didn't you want to show it to me?" He says, "No, I don't want to talk about my father. He left me when I was 2. I was very touched with this entire situation. And I said, "There must be a definite reason for him to take it." He says, "I don't care what reason there could be, but I just know that he was irresponsible. He left me as a baby." And I said, "You would not want to see him again?" He said, "I don't care if I see him or not." And I said, "But do you know that he might care to see you?" So he said, "That is a possibility." And then he turns to me and says, "What would this man say to that?" I was a little taken aback. So, because I had already told him that he's like Jesus. So here he was wanting to know, what would this man say? And I said that this man would say that you forgive your father. That's what he would say. I mean, I just felt that was the answer that came in my mind, that that's what this man would say. He said, "You really think I should forgive my father?" I said, "Yes, at least you should try to forgive your father. And if you see him and you may change your opinion about him, and he might have a different feeling for you." I was very moved with this incident, and that's why I'm sharing it with you. And he said, do you have a picture of his or something? So I had this booklet in my bag, This Man of Love. Some of you may have seen this. A recent publication which introduces Baba. And there was a color picture of Baba, a postcard in it. So I pulled it out of my bag and I gave it to him. He kept staring at the picture. He didn't seem inclined to read the book. But he did, because he was interested in looking out of the window. But he kept on staring at the book and he took it with him. I'm not concerned whether he will read the book or not. But what impressed me most was this child of 15 was prepared. There was a pull that brought him from down the aisle to a seat next to me to hear the name of Meher Baba. And perhaps, who knows, today we heard several children say how my life was changed. Perhaps this Baba putting the finger on his heart could have changed his life, could have changed the life of his father. Who knows? Baba said about the pull. Baba talked about the fire within each one of us. For some of us, there are only ashes. That's what we experience and feel, and that's what we imagine. But when we dig deep within those ashes, when we really scramble through them, we find this little ember. We blow on it, we fan it, and the ember begins to shine and glow and coruscate. And we feel the pull. And we begin to recognize that it is this ember which is the breath of the living Spirit. And we recognize it, but we go back into our daily lives and we cover it with our impressions, our neurotic tendencies, and with our attitudes, with all the garbage of the marketplace. We cover it with that. But a time comes when there is the strong pull of this ember and it turns into fire. Today we're going to talk a lot about fire. And this fire begins to glow in our hearts, and we are completely prepared and ready to spend the rest of our lives sitting around this fire, and at the same time celebrate this fire of love. This story that I told you about the boy gave me a stronger feeling of what Baba calls desperateness. He terms it divine desperateness. In essence, each one of us go through this phase of divine desperateness. We go through various different paths. We go through different alleyways of drugs and meditation and yoga and all kinds of things. Each one of us have been through those various pathways. And we found that we haven't found something permanent. We're constantly looking for that something permanent. So we are constantly seeking and seeking and seeking. As seekers, we intellectualize. We go through periods of rationalizing several of our actions, and we discover that that's not the answer. We find suddenly that we have discovered, or rather we at that moment we suspect that we have discovered the true master. And we say, could Meher Baba be that master? We tread very cautiously, very, very cautiously. And then suddenly we realize and we say, Eureka, we have found him. And then we become Baba lovers with the Eureka factor. And everything is beautiful and everything is joyous and everything is wonderful. We begin to live in joy. But as someone said, that's also the honeymoon period. That's also the period where you have discovered the highest of the high. Actually, you have exercised the highest form of your intuition. We constantly talk about intuition as to whether we bought the right cereal or not. But what is the highest form of intuition as far as I am concerned? The highest form of intuition for me is the recognition that Meher Baba is God in human form. And everything else is a parlor game. Everything else is the ancillary or the support system. Whether you made the right decision today or you made the wrong decision tomorrow, or how do you work on your intuition, or all that is the support system which follows, which is important, which has a place. But you have already exercised your highest prerogative, your highest intuition of having recognized Meher Baba as the highest of the high. But you're still not sure. You're still not trusting your intuition. So Baba beckons you, he brings you closer. He wants to embrace you. He wants to crush you in his arms. But you want to cling on to your neurotic tendencies, to your warts and your moles, and to your negativities. And Meher Baba is a tough master to follow. He comes with that sword, and he wants to slice those layers one after the other. You're so fond of your negativities, you want to cling on to them. So you hesitate. You don't surrender. He wants to give you his love. He wants you to be burnished gold. He wants to open you up and pour his love into you. But you hold him back. Once while reading a story about Buddha, I recollect, there are actually two stories. A king came to the Buddha with the finest diamond he had in his treasure house, and he presented it to the Buddha. And the Buddha said, "Drop it." The king was taken aback, he dropped it. The second time he came with a beautiful bouquet of flowers, and the Buddha said, "Drop it." And he dropped it. The third time he came empty-handed, and the Buddha embraced him and said, "I wanted to drop whatever your negativities are so that I could make you as perfect as I am." There was another story that I once read. I think actually it was Irich who pointed it out to me. And that was a story about a man who went about doing his own business. He was actually looking after his cows. And Buddha suddenly got up from his mandali and said, "I have to go to this village." And he went to this village. And it was announced that the Buddha would come and give a discourse. And Buddha came in the morning. And this man who was rearing the cow, suddenly the cow ran away. He went in search of the cow. So he knew that Buddha was coming to give a talk, but he couldn't go because he figured that it was more important to him to search for the cow rather than to go for the Buddha, for which he had longed all his life. But he chose to go in search of the cow because that's what the master would have wanted of him. So all day passed and the Buddha just sat under the tree. And everybody wondered. And then at the end of when it was dusk, the man found the cow and he tied the cow. He was hungry and tired. He said, "I'll just take a chance. The Lord might be there." So he goes there and he finds the Buddha sitting there, and he's very pleased. So he sits at the edge of the crowd, and Buddha turns to his disciple and says, "Is there any food?" So they say, "Yes, Master, there is food. Would you go and feed that man sitting at the edge of the crowd?" So they go and take the food and feed him. The Buddha waits, and at the end of it, he starts his discourse and talks about it. And the people who were his close ones were furious that here was the Lord and the Master who kept waiting everybody the whole day for that old man. And Buddha said, "I came only for him." So when the disciple is ready, the Master comes. So why did I narrate the stories? Because there were several instances where Baba made every effort to reach out, to slice those layers. Although I was born in a Baba family, and I met Baba when I was, basically when I was born, but consciously when I was about 4 or 5. And all along, there were several, of course, instances that I could narrate about my life with Baba in the early years. But it was always, as I grew older, I discovered that it was the intellect that I was feeding all the time. Very fond of philosophy and things like, I would read Kierkegaard and Kant and all these people. And every time that I wanted to reach out to Baba, I felt that the intellect was coming in the way. And while Anne was talking this morning, she said Baba told her not to read, "Don't worry about God Speaks." It was the contrary with me. Baba wanted me to read God Speaks time and time again. It was in 1966 that I was invited by Baba to be in his presence. And this was a very momentous occasion for me, because I was meeting him after quite some time, and there had been a tremendous feeling of separation from him. And he had cabled saying that I should come, and then he cabled back saying I should not come. And then I had written a very passionate letter to him, expressing my longing, and then he agreed that I come for 5 minutes. And of course I stayed on for a long time. But when I got off the train, there was Erich's brother Meherwan waiting for me. And the train was late. And Meherwan pounced on me and said, "Baba is waiting for you, Baba is waiting for you, hurry up." And I was just so taken aback that here, just a small person, just one of the thousands who loved him, Baba was waiting for me. And he rushed me to their house there, and there were a group of Erich's family, and they said, "Oh, but you're going to visit Baba." So one of them grabbed my bag, another one took my shirt off, another one, I think, took my trousers off, and they just changed my clothes. Another one was putting yardley on my body, another one was putting some powder. They were all putting perfumes on my body. I couldn't understand. You're going to meet Baba, and you should be fresh and smelling good. It was just sheer love. And you let people do anything when they love you and when they love Baba. So I was bundled into the car and rushed. And Erich said, "Baba is waiting for you." He was standing at the door. With Baba, this was always the case. He's late. What's the time? He's late. "Baba, but his train might be late." He's late. Send him. He's late. All the stories you will find of Baba is, he was always very anxious as to why. Time was a very important factor with Baba. You couldn't just procrastinate. Baba was a practical avatar. Every move, every act, every word that he uttered was a practical aspect telling you how to live in the world. He didn't want dummies to sit around him. He wanted people who would use what they got from him into their daily lives. So I was bundled in, and there was the Mandali sitting around. You don't normally notice the Mandali when Baba is sitting there. I rushed into the room, rushed into his arms, embraced him, kissed him on both cheeks, fell at his feet, and sat down. I had just come from a Third World Religions conference that I had attended, and Baba asked me to narrate the entire event, which I'm not going to narrate now, but told me the whole... and I started talking. With Baba, it was, when you were in his presence, not for a moment did you feel he was silent. So you start talking, and then you see that Baba is silent, and you are silent. You suddenly become silent. And Erich said, "But Baba is silent, you are not." And I started talking in Gujarati. You do get a little bewildered when you are in Baba's presence. But then you get composed, and particularly when you are the cynosure of all eyes, which happened in this particular instance, since everybody was against the wall and here I was in the center. And I started talking in Gujarati, with the understanding that I was just talking to Baba. So Baba said, "Francis can't understand Gujarati, English." So I again started the whole story in English. And then I started narrating it, gradually narrating it. And then Baba stopped, tells Francis, "Very good English, Francis." So Francis nodded and, "Yes, Baba." And this was he put you at ease. At that moment you were thinking, am I expressing myself well? Am I conveying everything that Baba wants me to convey? A million thoughts go through your mind at that moment when you are, am I speaking the truth? That's something very important that comes to your mind. Am I exaggerating? But this was an entire event that I was narrating to Baba. And I narrated the entire story of my various encounters with different people, with Sant Kripal Singh and with Muni Sushil Kumar and all these people at the Third World Religions Conference, including, there was a little bit of humor about my joining a procession which was headed by a yogi who was stark naked, and we walked through the streets of Delhi. And there was a little bit of humor about that. This was a conference, religions conference, which I attended, where people from all over the world had come in, and it was a Third World Religions Conference, and there were people from the United States as well, with long, the Ku Klux Klan kind of thing and all that. So they're pretty representation. So Baba was quite amused to hear all these stories, and at one point I asked him, I said, "Baba, I could answer all the questions that people asked me at the religions conference, but there was one question that kept eluding me, and that was, how can Meher Baba say that he is God in human form?" And I'd always wanted to ask him this question. So I decided to use a little tact in asking him this question. And I'm sharing this with you because there are a lot of new people here, new to us but not to Baba, so I'm repeating it. And Baba said, "You are God in human form, Erich, Francis, each one of you are God in human form. But it is this veil that is covering you from the discovery of your being God in human form. I am aware, I am conscious of it. one day you too will be conscious of it. And those who have asked you this question will also be conscious of being God in human form, because they are God too. And I was so happy to get an answer to my question directly from Baba. That afternoon, a number of things happened. Baba asked me to tell him a joke, and my mind went blank. And I was bad at jokes, so Baba said, "Do you want to do something?" And I said, "Yes, Baba, I want to play the mouth organ." So I pulled out my mouth organ and started playing the mouth organ. And I just didn't want to stop, so I played all the tunes that I knew on my mouth organ. And Baba didn't stop me, so I kept playing. And then I get, the women Mandli were behind the door. So I get a message from them saying, "Do you know Swanee River?" And at that point I hadn't even heard of the name. So I said, "No, Baba." And then there was the Irani group that had to come in. So everything came to an end, and there were questions about my health at that time. And that's an interesting story that some of you might like to hear, because there are so many people in the healing, in the healing arts and things. I had a severe problem of constipation in those days, and Baba asked me how my health was, because that used to be of paramount importance. Baba was very, very important, very, very emphatic about good health. So I told him about my problem of constipation, and that had led to a number of problems. So he said, "What have you been doing about it?" So I said, "Baba, I've tried homeopathy and I've tried allopathy." And Baba said, "Have you tried Triphala?" And I said, "No, Baba." He said, "Do that for 6 months. Now, Triphala is an Ayurvedic powder which you take, and that relieves you. So Baba said, "Take that for 6 months." I said, "Yes, Baba." Then Baba said, "Have you got yourself physically checked up?" My father was here in the gathering too. And I said, "No, Baba." So, because a physical checkup in India is very, very expensive. What he was talking about was a full physical checkup. And I said, "No, Baba." So it was later that my father said, "Oh, Baba's talking of a physical checkup, which means a lot of money." And we were from a sort of a middle class family, but affording a physical checkup was a lot of money. And Baba called Goher and said, "Is it possible for him to get a physical checkup?" So Goher said, "Yes, Baba, I'll have to call up the Ruby Clinic." So she called up the Ruby Clinic, and Baba said, "Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, go to the Ruby Clinic for a physical checkup." And I said, "Yes, Baba." And my father was in total turmoil, because he didn't know how he would afford it. So at the end of when everything was over and I was stepping out, Baba embraced me, I touched his feet, and then Iraj said, "Naosherwan, Baba wants you back." I was back, and Baba said, "This is my prasad to you." And in that prasad, I went outside the door and I opened the envelope, and in that were 100 rupee notes. I was so taken aback that even I rushed back to Baba and I told him I couldn't accept it, because I was so taken aback. It was an irrational act, but I was so overwhelmed that I could not imagine that Baba would give me 500 rupees for my medical checkup. So Ira said, "You don't refuse Baba's prasad." And I bowed down to him and I walked out. That afternoon, it was an open darshan for those who had worked during the Sahavas programs and who had not had an opportunity of being with Baba. And I had not been a worker. So everybody, those who were present, were workers. And they had all gathered at Baba's feet. So Baba asked Irich whether anybody was waiting outside, and I was waiting for my father. So Irich said, Baba, Naosherwan is there. So Baba said, ask him to come in. I was the only one who was among the non-worker in the group. So Baba called me and asked me to sit at his feet. And again, there was these large crowds of men and women and children, and everybody was talking about various things. And then at the end of it, this was the hour that came to an end, and Baba said, let's have the arati. So I started singing the arati. It wasn't the Gujarati, it was the Hindi arati. Because the man who had written the arati was also present there. So he led the arati, Madhusudan. And while I started to sing, I started to sob uncontrollably. Just sobbed and sobbed. And Baba looked at me and said, what is the matter? And I looked up and couldn't answer him. Just at that very moment, I felt like a cup overbrimming with love. And Baba just seemed so vast at that very moment that I felt that I just couldn't contain that love anymore. And as the drops fell on my hand, they were ice cold drops. And I knew that those were the drops of just pure love, because the love, the tears of passion were hot. And for me, from that point onwards, Baba picked me up, embraced me, and let me go. From that point onwards, for me, it was a metamorphosis. It was a changing from the intellect, which I had been so heavily relying on and so proud of, that from that point onwards, my heart opened up and I was able to relate to Baba from the heart. Despite the fact that I was born in a Baba family, one would imagine that my heart quality would open up at birth. But no. You are born with your sanskars, you are born with all your tendencies and attitudes. And even with those who are born in a Baba family, Baba has to work on them all the time. So from that point onwards, I was able to relate to Baba with my heart. And that's what I say whenever we have meetings in New Jersey, there are constantly people emphasizing the intellect. And I constantly keep reiterating the fact that the intellect is like a boulder that sits on your heart. That the intellect is fine, it's beautiful. It's a concept of beauty and knowledge. And you see the beloved. You accept Meher Baba and you say that that's the concept that I had of beauty and knowledge, and it fits in perfectly like a glove in the beloved, and I accept him as one. Because it fulfills my concept of beauty and knowledge. But then, as you go along the path, you discover that the intellect is a big millstone round your neck, which you carry from lifetime to lifetime. It's only the opening of the heart that really gives you the impetus to go on. And ultimately you'll discover whether it is your relationship with your father, with your mother. When you come down to the bottom line, it's not the dollar, it is love. Look within you and ask this question: what is the bottom line in my life? Why is there confusion and conflict in my life? Why is there a breakdown of relationship? Why don't I get along well with my mother? Why am I estranged with my father? What's going on between me and my husband? Why can't I relate to my son? And the answer is, that you've put this heavy block on your heart. You're not relating to them. You're not talking to them. We're only talking to ourselves. Pardon my observation, but go back to the discourses of Baba and read all the discourses from 1931 to 1958 that Baba has given in the United States. And every discourse is on self-interest. And Baba time and again said that the greatest problem of this country, it has tremendous spiritual energy, which it can share with the world if it can eliminate self-interest. And I see it happening in New York all the time. But I also find that hearts are opening up. The revolution that Baba talks of, the new humanity that Baba talks of, the new age that Baba talks of is happening, and it is happening now. At the time of Jesus, there were just 300 disciples. He had 250 to 300 disciples. Today, 1/4 of the world follows him. Because it was the responsibility of each one to be the carriers of his message. And today, while we imbibe love, the beloved's love in our hearts, we also go out into the world and tell the world that Meher Baba is God in human form. A little bit of experience, a personal experience of mine. Again in 1966, I was sitting in Baba's presence at his feet, and Baba turns to me and says, "Do you love me?" Baba had this habit of asking all the time, "Do you love me?" And I said, "Yes, Baba, absolutely." Then you forget about it. Then you think that, I've answered Baba. He goes and asks somebody else, "Do you love me?" He said, "Yes, Baba, I do love you." He asked somebody, "Do you love me?" And then something else happens. Suddenly Baba turned to me and said, "Do you love me?" And I said, "Baba, absolutely." And he stretches out his hand, and naturally I stretch out my hand. We both hold hands, and he tells me, "I want you to tell the world that I'm God in human form." And I said, "Yes, Baba." And then he does this, and someone comes with this medallion that Baba had, that this Vivian Agostini had crafted. And Baba gives it to me as a gift, puts his hand on it and gives it to me. And to me, this was a mandate. To me, it was a gift sealing this mandate. But as I look back, I think this mandate is given to each one of us. It's a responsibility given to each one of us. That if Baba has given us so much of love, if he has given us so much of joy, it is our duty, it's our responsibility, it is our mandate to share it with those we love, to share it with people in the world. Not to share it is to do a disservice to Baba. Not to share it with others is like a mother denying milk to a child. We must go back to our little homes, to the mountains where we live, to the towns where we live, to the cities where we live. Examine our capabilities and capacities. Each one of us is not a nuclear scientist or a doctor or a philosopher, and we are all simple people, doing simple things, leading simple lives. Go back. Gather your abilities, gather your talents. Give them to Baba. Take them back from him, as Baba talks of using provisional ego. Take it back. Take it in your hands and share it with others. And the more you share it, the more you're giving, the more love. It's like a reservoir. It's an unending stream that will well up within you. So as I sat back, thinking about, fine, we've had the eureka factor. We are Baba lovers. That's wonderful. What happens next? We get into the complacency mode, or rather the complacency factor. Fine. I'm not a group person. I don't go to centers. Something that Phyllis said struck me immensely yesterday. Her reference to the perfume bottle. You have this perfume bottle and you don't share, and you don't use its fragrance. You have Baba with you and you don't share it with others. Ultimately, what happens is you get parched. And then you wonder that this daman that you had sworn to cling on with both hands is gradually slipping. And what is the purpose of your birth? But to hold on to it. There is no other purpose. There is no other reason. So as I sat back and I said, what are the demands that we must make on ourselves? And I said to myself, surrender. Baba has asked for our surrender. This surrender, we reach a point where we make it and we say, yes, Baba, I will surrender to you. But is that an empty word? Or is that just a promise that we've made which we don't intend keeping? That surrender, the promise of surrender that we make to Him, we carry it all the way as a demandment on ourselves. We demand ourselves to surrender. He doesn't ask you for your surrender, but you have to surrender. He's not asking for your love, but you have to love. If you surrender, if you love, He doesn't get a raise in pay. He is already there. It's not a joy for Him to live in the body is not the greatest thing for Him. It's the crucifixion that's important. And He suffers for you, for each one of us. And I have seen Him suffer with my own eyes. I have seen Him suffer with my own eyes. So when you say you surrender, you stretch that surrender all the way. It's not a one-time thing. It's a continuum. It's a continuity. Again, the desperateness that you experienced when you were seeking, when you were searching. You let that desperateness flag. I was desperately searching and I have found Baba. And you take a sigh of relief and you become complacent. That desperateness, that pull, that ember, don't let it get back into the ashes. That fire of love, let it grow all the way through. Not only in this lifetime, but in many, many lifetimes. That desperateness, the divine desperateness that Baba talks of, let it go all the way through. So that you can get that glow, that feel, that fire can be a continuity. That Sahavas, that living with Him can be a continuity. The third factor, the third demandment that you make on yourself is one of obedience. A factor that Baba time and time again emphasized. He relegated everything into the shadows when He talked of obedience. And you have read about obedience, but the two aspects of obedience that Baba gave me directly, of course Baba gave me several orders, but the one that were direct and very important to me were don't worry and be happy. Now to us, they sound just trivial words to a layman on the street. But this to me was a very, very important thing. Two very important orders, because they would totally eliminate every other confusion, every other negativity. Not to worry, don't worry. And when you go back into your life, I'll tell you an example that happened just 2 days back. I have a rather rough boss. I've always had rough bosses. And I hadn't told him that I was going over this long weekend to the Sahavas, and I said, I'm going over, I need to go early on Thursday, because I was catching an afternoon flight. And he said, really? Why didn't you tell me earlier? And I said, well, I didn't. He said, you could have stayed on for 2-3 days and done some work for the company in Los Angeles. And I was positive that he would say something negative to me, because he has a kind of an attitude. But all my life, I mean, there are hundreds of instances I could sit down and narrate to you. Whether it happened to my family or whether it happened around me. Even when I came to the United States in 1982 and I decided to stay on in this country and the various factors in my daily life, I find that the order, the Baba's order not to worry has helped me sail through. Sometimes to be happy has been a problem, but one has to make a concerted effort. Baba always said, try to be happy. Try. So one tries to be happy.